I've told this story maybe 100 times now, and every single time somebody stops me halfway through and says, "That can't be real." And I get it. I really do. If I hadn't been standing right there, close enough to smell the rain on the pavement, I probably wouldn't believe it either. But I was there, I saw the whole thing, and I still think about that little boy's hands. Let me start from the beginning. It was a gray Thursday in late October. I remember because I'd almost stayed home. The sky over the city had that heavy, swollen look it gets before it decides whether or not to ruin your day. My knees were aching. I'm 63, and my knees have opinions about wet weather. But my granddaughter had come to visit for the week, and she'd never seen the guards outside the palace, so there we were. Me, her, and about 200 strangers all standing behind the black iron railings, waiting for something to happen. The guard on duty that morning stood in his box like a statue. Tall lad, straight-backed. That tall dark cap pulled low, the red tunic crisp even in the damp. You know the type. They train them to look like they're carved out of something harder than the rest of us. He didn't blink, didn't shift his weight. There was a woman near me trying to make him laugh, waving her scarf, doing a little dance, and he gave her nothing, not a twitch. The crowd loved that. They always do. My granddaughter, Priya, tugged my sleeve. "Nanny, is he even breathing?" "Barely," I whispered, and she giggled. That was the mood. Light, ordinary. A cold morning turning into a slightly colder one. Tourists holding up phones. Somebody's toddler crying about a dropped ice cream. Pigeons doing their pigeon business by the gate. The smell of wet stone and roasted nuts from the cart down the road. Nothing about it felt like the kind of day you'd remember for the rest of your life. Then I noticed the boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. Small for his age, I thought. He had this bright yellow raincoat, the plastic kind that crinkles, and it was 2 sizes too big, so his hands disappeared into the sleeves. He was standing right at the front, pressed against the railing, and he wasn't looking at the guard the way the other children were. The other kids were laughing, pointing, daring each other to shout something. This boy wasn't laughing at all. He was watching, careful, serious, like a grown man who'd lost something. And then he lifted his hands. At first I thought he was just waving the way kids do, trying to get the guard's attention. But it wasn't a wave. His fingers were moving in these quick, deliberate shapes, curling, straightening, tapping his palm, touching his chest. It had a rhythm to it, a pattern. It looked like he was spelling something out in the air over and over, faster each time. The woman next to me leaned over and said, "Bless him, he's doing magic tricks for the soldier." But I'd worked 20 years as a teaching assistant, and for 8 of those years I'd been in a classroom with 2 deaf children. I knew what I was looking at. That boy wasn't doing magic. He was signing. And whatever he was signing, he was desperate about it. I nudged Priya, "Look at his hands, Beta." She did, and even she, at 11 years old, went quiet. The boy's face had started to crumple, not crying yet, but close. His little jaw was shaking. He kept glancing back over his shoulder into the crowd behind him, then whipping his head forward again to sign at the guard, harder now, almost slapping his own hands together. And the guard. Well, here's the thing. The guard was looking at him. I don't mean glancing. I mean he had broken that perfect statue stillness, and his eyes had dropped down to the boy at the railing, just for a second. Then his eyes moved past the boy, scanning the crowd behind him, the way you'd scan a room for a fire you could smell but couldn't see. Then back to the boy's hands. I remember thinking, that's odd. They don't do that. They train them not to do that. The boy signed again. Slower this time, deliberate, like he was making sure the guard understood. And I watched the guard's face change. It's hard to describe. He didn't gasp or shout, nothing dramatic, but something moved across his features, some flicker, the way the surface of water changes when something big passes underneath it. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared just slightly. And his eyes, God, his eyes went sharp all of a sudden. Alert. Awake in a way he hadn't been 30 seconds earlier. He looked at the boy. He gave one small nod. And then he abandoned his post. Now I need you to understand what that means. These men do not leave their positions. It's not allowed. It is, as far as I understand it, one of the most serious things a guard can do. People have tried everything to make them break, shouting insults, flashing cameras, stepping into their path. They just march past you. They will literally walk through you if they have to. Their discipline is the whole point of them. So when this young man stepped down out of his box, turned on his heel, and started moving fast along the inside of the railing, the entire crowd made a sound. This sort of collective gasp, a murmur that rolled through everyone at once. He's moving. Why is he? Is that allowed? His boots hit the wet stone in this sharp, urgent rhythm, not the slow, ceremonial march. A real walk, a fast one. And the boy in the yellow raincoat was already scrambling along the outside of the railing to keep up with him, pointing frantically back into the crowd, into the thick of all those tourists and umbrellas and shopping bags. I grabbed Priya's hand and we pushed forward. I don't know why. I just knew in my gut that something was very wrong and that little boy had known it before any of us. The guard reached the gate. There was another officer there, not in ceremonial dress, one of the ones in the darker uniforms who actually managed the crowd, and the guard said something to him, low and fast. The officer's whole body changed. He straightened up, spoke into his radio, and the two of them started moving into the crowd together, following the boy. And the boy led them straight to a woman lying on the ground. I didn't see her at first. That's the thing about a crowd, people close around a gap like water. But as we got nearer, the crowd was already peeling back, and there she was, on the wet pavement, maybe 30 feet from where I'd been standing the whole time. A young woman, 30s maybe. She was on her side and her body was doing that thing, shaking, jerking her arms stiff and wrong. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing anything. There was a bit of foam at the corner of her mouth. A canvas bag had spilled next to her, oranges rolling across the stones, and nobody around her seemed to know what to do. A man was crouched beside her going, "Miss, can you hear me?" in this useless, panicked voice. A woman was filming it on her phone, actually filming it. I wanted to slap the phone out of her hand. And the little boy threw himself down next to the woman and put his hand on her chest and looked up with the most broken expression I have ever seen on a child's face. She was his mother. Of course she was his mother. I found out later she had epilepsy. She'd had a seizure with no warning, just dropped in the middle of the crowd, and by the time she went down, she couldn't speak, couldn't call out, couldn't do anything. And her son, her deaf son, who had no voice to shout within a language any of these strangers would understand, had done the only thing he knew how to do. He'd run to the one person in that whole square standing above the crowd, the one person everybody was looking at, the one fixed point in a sea of moving strangers. He'd run to the guard, and he'd signed the only word he thought might work. Help, my mother, help. Over and over. To a soldier he had no reason to believe would understand a single shape his hands made. But here's the part that still gets me, even now, even telling it to you. The guard understood. He dropped to his knees beside that woman on the wet ground in his spotless red tunic, and he turned her gently onto her side, moving her head so she wouldn't hurt herself, clearing the space around her. Calm, so calm, like he'd done it 100 times. He was talking the whole while not to her, she couldn't hear him, but to the boy. And as he worked, he kept one hand free, and with that hand in between everything, he was signing back. Small shapes, quick ones. I couldn't read all of them from where I stood, but I read enough. Good boy, I've got her, you did right, good boy. The child's face when the guard signed that back to him, I will never forget it. The relief that broke across it. This little boy who had been carrying the entire weight of his mother's life on his shoulders for God knows how many terrifying minutes, alone in a crowd of hundreds, suddenly finding out he wasn't alone anymore. That somebody had heard him. That somebody spoke his language. He collapsed against the guard's arm and just shook. The ambulance came quick. 4 or 5 minutes, maybe less. They must have been close. The paramedics took over, and by then the woman had stopped seizing and was starting to come back to herself, groggy and frightened and confused the way people are afterward. They got her onto the stretcher. The boy wouldn't let go of the guard's hand, so the guard walked with him all the way to the ambulance, still in his uniform, signing little things to him the whole way. Keeping him calm, keeping him steady. And right before the boy climbed into the ambulance, he turned around and signed one more thing to the guard. Thank you. The guard put his hand flat over his own heart, and he bowed his head just a little. Then the doors closed, and the ambulance pulled away, and the whole square stood there in complete silence, 200 strangers not knowing what to do with what they'd just seen. I want to tell you the guard got a medal, that there was a ceremony, cameras, a headline. Maybe there was. I never found out his name, and I looked, believe me. The story went round for a few days, a blurry video someone posted, and then it disappeared the way everything disappears now. But I did hear one thing, weeks later, from a woman who claimed to know somebody who worked there. And I don't know if it's true, but I choose to believe it because it's the kind of thing that ought to be true. She said the guard had a younger brother, deaf from birth, that the two of them had grown up sharing a silent language nobody else in their family bothered to learn properly, that he'd spent his whole childhood being the one person in the room who could talk to his little brother, being his brother's voice in a world that kept forgetting he was there. And that when he saw a small boy at the railing, signing help with shaking hands while everyone around him smiled and waved and looked straight through him, he knew exactly what it was to be that child. He knew what it was to have something enormous to say, and no way to make anyone hear it. So he broke every rule they'd ever drilled into him. He stepped down. He walked away from the one duty he'd sworn to keep. And in doing it, he probably saved a woman's life and gave a frightened little boy the one thing he needed more than anything else in that moment, which was to not be invisible. People ask me, wasn't he in trouble for leaving his post? And I don't know, maybe. Rules are rules, and I'm sure there was paperwork, some officer somewhere frowning at a report. But I'll tell you what I've come to believe, standing at that railing all these months later, watching the guards do their perfect, motionless duty. Discipline isn't the same thing as goodness. All that training, all that stillness, all that never flinch, never move, that's not the point of a person. That's just the frame around the person. The point is what's inside it. The point is whether, when a child you've never met flashes a signal that everyone else mistakes for a game, you're paying enough attention to catch it. And whether, when you catch it, you have the heart to move. He had both. He caught it and he moved. I've stopped daring the guards to laugh now when I visit. I don't try to make them break anymore. I just look at their faces, and I wonder what they're really seeing out here in the crowd. What they're catching that the rest of us walk straight past. Because somewhere out, there is a little boy in a yellow raincoat who's alive to his mother today for one reason only. Someone was looking closely enough to understand. And that, I've decided, is the most heroic thing I have ever seen a person do. Not the stillness, not the uniform, not the not flinching. The looking, the choosing to look, when it would have been so much easier to keep staring straight ahead at nothing at all.